The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in deep hues of purple and orange. The air grew cooler as Sam, Jess, and Mark set up their tent in the heart of the Whispering Pines campground. It was a place known for its beauty but also for its eerie tales. Locals spoke of strange noises at night, shadows that moved on their own, and campers who never returned. But the trio laughed off the stories, eager for a weekend away from the city. As they pitched their tent, the trees stood tall and silent around them, their branches swaying gently in the evening breeze. "It's perfect out here," Jess said, her voice bright. She had always loved nature, finding peace among the trees. Sam nodded, but he felt a chill run down his spine. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Once the tent was up, they gathered around a small campfire, the flames crackling and popping as they roasted marshmallows. The warmth of the fire was comforting, but the shadows danced ominously around them. Mark told ghost stories, his voice low and teasing, making Jess giggle nervously. Sam smiled but felt uneasy, glancing into the dark woods beyond the firelight. "Come on, Sam. Don't tell me you believe in those old tales," Mark teased, tossing a stick into the fire. "It's just a bunch of nonsense." He could hear the wind whispering through the trees, almost like it was trying to share a secret. "Yeah, I know," Sam replied, trying to sound convincing. But the stories lingered in his mind. They were just camping, but something felt off. As night fell, the stars twinkled above, and the forest came alive with sounds. Crickets chirped and an owl hooted in the distance. But then a new sound emerged, a low, guttural growl that sent shivers down Sam's spine. He glanced at Jess and Mark, who were too engrossed in their conversation to notice. "Did you hear that?" Sam asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Hear what?" Jess replied, looking puzzled. "Nothing," he said, forcing a smile. Maybe it was just his imagination. He tried to shake off the feeling, but the growl echoed in his mind. Later that night, as they settled into their sleeping bags, Sam lay awake, staring at the ceiling of the tent. The wind rustled the branches outside, and every now and then he thought he heard something moving in the darkness. He wanted to sleep, to forget the strange noises, but he couldn't. Suddenly, a loud snap echoed through the night like a branch breaking underfoot. Sam's heart raced. "Did you hear that?" he said, his voice trembling. Jess stared, her eyes wide. "What is it?" "I think someone's out there," Sam whispered, his breath coming in quick bursts. Mark rolled over, annoyed. "It's probably just a deer or something. Go back to sleep." But Sam couldn't. He listened intently, the sounds of the forest becoming sharper, more defined. Then he heard it again, a soft rustling, followed by a faint whisper. He strained to make out the words, but they were muffled, like someone was speaking just out of reach. "Guys," he said, shaking Mark's shoulder, "I really think we should check it out." Mark groaned but finally sat up, rubbing his eyes. "Fine. Let's go look." The three of them crawled out of the tent, the cool night air hitting them like a wave. The fire had burned low, leaving only glowing embers. They stepped cautiously into the dark, the beam of Mark's flashlight cutting through the shadows. "Stay close," Mark said, his voice firm. "We don't want to get lost." They walked deeper into the woods, the trees looming like silent sentinels around them. The rustling grew louder, and Sam's heart pounded in his chest. He felt a presence, something lurking just beyond the light. "Do you see anything?" Jess asked, her voice trembling. "No," Mark replied, but Sam could see the uncertainty in his eyes. Damn it, Mark cursed, shaking the flashlight. It was just working. Then suddenly the flashlight flickered and went out, plunging them into darkness. Let's go back, Jess said, her voice rising in panic. I don't like this. But before they could turn, the growl returned, louder this time, echoing through the trees. It was closer now, and Sam felt a cold sweat break out on his brow. We need to go. Now. They turned to run, but the darkness seemed to close in around them. The sounds of the forest faded away, replaced by a heavy silence. As they stumbled back toward the campsite, they heard a loud crash behind them, like something huge had fallen. Run, Mark shouted, and they sprinted through the underbrush, branches scratching at their arms and legs. Finally, they burst into the clearing where their tent stood, but something was wrong. The tent was unzipped, flapping wildly in the wind. What happened? Jess gasped, her eyes wide with fear. I don't know, Sam replied, scanning the area. Where's our stuff? Their backpacks were scattered on the ground, some items missing. The fire pit was cold, and the embers had died out completely. Panic surged through Sam. We need to get out of here. Mark nodded, his face pale. Let's pack what we can and leave. As they hurried to gather their belongings, Sam felt a chill creep up his spine. He turned, half expecting to see something lurking in the shadows. But there was nothing, just a tree standing silent and still. Did you hear that? Jess whispered again, her voice shaking. Before Sam could respond, the growl echoed through the clearing, closer than ever. It was a low, menacing sound that sent terror coursing through him. They all froze, fear gripping their hearts. Run, Mark shouted again, and they took off into the woods, leaving everything behind. They ran blindly, branches scratching their faces as they pushed through the underbrush. The growl followed them, growing louder, more menacing. Sam could feel it gaining on them, a predator stalking its prey. Where are we going? Jess cried, her voice filled with desperation. Just keep running, Mark yelled, but Sam could see the fear in his eyes. They were lost in the dark, the trees closing in around them. Suddenly, Jess tripped over a root and fell to the ground. Help, she screamed, panic rising in her voice. Sam and Mark skidded to a halt, turning back to help her. Sam reached down, pulling her to her feet. We have to go, he urged, but before they could move, the growl erupted from the darkness, shaking the very ground beneath them. Sam's heart raced as he realized it wasn't just a wild animal. It was something else, something unnatural. They stumbled backward, and then out of the shadows something emerged. It was massive, its eyes glowing like embers in the night. Run, Mark shouted again, and they took off, adrenaline pushing them forward. But the creature was fast, darting through the trees with an agility that seemed impossible. The creature was closing in, its growls echoing through the night. They burst into a small clearing, and Sam's heart sank. There was nowhere to go. Climb, Mark shouted, pointing to a nearby tree. They scrambled up the trunk, just crying out in fear as they pulled themselves onto a thick branch. It sniffed the air, searching for them. Sam's breath caught in his throat as he watched it pace, its eyes scanning the darkness. From their perch, they could see the creature prowling below, its form shifting and twisting in the shadows. Do you think he can see us? Jess whispered, her voice trembling. I don't know, Sam replied, trying to keep his voice steady. But we can't stay here forever. The creature let out a frustrated growl, and then, to their horror, it began to claw at the base of the tree. "It's trying to get up," Mark shouted. "Hold on," Sam urged, gripping the branch tightly. They had to think of something, but panic was rising in him like a tide. Just then they heard another sound, a low, haunting whisper that seemed to echo from the depths of the forest. It was a voice, soft and eerie, calling to them. "Come, come." "I don't know," Sam said, his heart racing. "But we can't listen to it." "What is that?" Jess whimpered, her eyes wide with fear. The creature paused, its head tilting as it seemed to hear the voice too. It hesitated, then turned and darted deeper into the woods, chasing the sound. "Now's our chance," Mark yelled, and they quickly climbed down from the tree, landing softly on the ground. They took off running again, not looking back. The whispers grew louder, calling to them, but Sam fought against the urge to listen. They had to escape. Finally, they broke through the trees and stumbled onto a dirt road. Relief washed over them, but they couldn't stop. They ran down the road, the moonlight guiding their way, until they reached a small cabin. "Help!" Mark shouted, banging on the door. "Please, someone let us in." After a moment, an elderly woman opened the door, her eyes wide with concern. "What's wrong?" she asked, glancing behind them. "Something is chasing us," Jess cried, her voice breaking. "Get inside," the woman urged, pulling them into the cabin and slamming the door shut. They huddled together, breathless and terrified. The woman lit a lantern, casting a warm glow around the room. "You're safe now," she said, though her voice trembled slightly. "What was that thing?" Sam asked, still shaking. The woman's face grew serious. "You shouldn't be out there at night. The forest holds many secrets, and some things are better left undisturbed." "What do you mean?" Jess asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "The whispering pines are known for their spirits," the woman explained. "Some are friendly, but others, they hunger for the living." Sam's stomach dropped. "We heard whispers," he admitted. "It was calling to us." The woman nodded gravely. "It feeds on fear. You must never listen to it. It will lead you to your doom." They sat in silence, the weight of her words hanging heavy in the air. Outside, the wind howled, and they could hear the faint echoes of the forest, the whispers dancing just beyond the walls of the cabin. "What do we do now?" Mark asked, his voice shaky. "You wait until dawn," the woman replied. "By then the spirits will retreat and you can leave safely." As they settled in, the reality of the situation began to sink in. They were trapped, but at least they were safe for now. They could hear the whispers outside, a haunting melody that tugged at their minds. After what felt like hours, the whispers faded and the night grew still. Sam couldn't shake the feeling of dread that clung to him. He knew they had to get out of there, but he also knew they couldn't leave until morning. As dawn broke, the first light of day filtered through the windows. The woman stirred, looking relieved. "It's safe now," she said, opening the door. The trio stepped outside, the sunlight warming their skin. But as they looked around, they realized the forest was still, too still. The trees stood silent, their branches swaying gently in the breeze, but there was no sound. No birds, no rustling leaves, just an eerie calm. "Let's go," Sam urged, glancing back at the cabin. They started down the dirt road, hearts racing as they moved away from the safety of the cabin. But as they walked, the whispers returned, soft and insistent. "Come, come." "No," Sam said, shaking his head. We can't listen. But Jess looked back, her eyes wide. What if it's trying to help us? Don't, Mark shouted, grabbing her arm. We have to keep going. They pressed on, the whispers growing louder, more urgent. The trees seemed to close in around them, shadows stretching long and dark. Just when they thought they were free, the growl returned, echoing through the woods, sending them into a panic. Run, Sam shouted. And they took off down the road, the creature's breath hot on their heels. They ran until they could see the edge of the forest, the safety of the open field ahead. But the whispers grew louder, wrapping around them like a fog. Don't listen, Mark yelled, but Jess was already turning back, drawn by the voice. Jess, no, Sam shouted, reaching for her, but it was too late. She stepped away from them, her eyes glazed over as she walked toward the trees. Jess, Mark cried, but she didn't respond. The whispers enveloped her, pulling her into the shadows. No, Sam screamed, but he felt a strong pull toward the forest too, an overwhelming urge to follow her. Fight it, Mark shouted, grabbing Sam's arm. We have to go. With all his strength, Sam turned away from the whispers, forcing himself to run. They sprinted toward the edge of the forest, the growl echoing behind them. Finally, they broke free, stumbling into the open field. They collapsed on the ground, gasping for breath, but Jess was gone. We have to go back, Sam said, panic rising in his chest. No, Mark shouted. We can't. We'll end up like her. Tears streamed down Sam's face as he looked back at the forest, knowing they couldn't save her. The whispers faded into the distance and the growl was silenced, but the pain of losing Jess would haunt him forever. They made their way to the nearest road, hitching a ride back to town. But as they drove away, Sam couldn't shake the feeling that the forest was still watching, waiting for its next victim. Later, when they returned to the city, the memories of that night lingered like a dark cloud. They tried to forget, but every rustle of leaves, every whisper of wind brought them back to the whispering pines. And as the years passed, Sam often found himself staring into the woods, haunted by the knowledge that some secrets are better left undiscovered. The forest held its mysteries close, and somewhere in the depths of the trees, Jess's laughter echoed, forever lost among the whispers of the night.